Gentlemen, welcome to the Order of Man podcast and to the AMA, the Ask Me Anything. As you can guess, I'm running solo today. Mr. Mickler is out with family, so you're going to get my responses to the questions in which we fielded today from the Facebook group. That's facebook.com/group/Order of Man to join us there. And of course, to join Mr. Mickler on the Insta, that's at Ryan Mickler. Let's get into this. Primarily, like I mentioned, questions today from Facebook, but we do field questions from Insta as well. So make sure to follow up with Mr. Mickler on the social media. All right, our first question, Alec Candelari. Sorry, Alec. Do you think in today's climate with masculinity under attack and reject by more people than ever, that we could have a successful army should a draft arise in a World War III scenario? Today's 8-year-olds very different from those that were drafted, let's say, in Vietnam. So this is not my specialty, of course, but I do think Mr. Mickler spoke with Tim Kennedy about this a few episodes back. So check out that episode. I think it's episode 708 is what I wrote down here. So check that out. I think he speaks to the recruiting process and how the military is struggling getting volunteers into the military. However, let's think about it. What happens when you struggle and you can't find the right resources, whether it be a job or whether it be the military? We adjust our standards, right? And so I wouldn't be surprised that the military hasn't already lowered their standards or adjusted their standards to attract more individuals. And, you know, from a World War scenario, I think, Alec, I think your assumption is probably right. I think there's a tide that has changed in regards to masculinity. I think of, Tillman, you know, one of my favorite stories. He's a Cardinals, played for Arizona Cardinals in the NFL after 9/11. He enlisted. I think that kind of man are diminishing in our society. And so, you know, if we had a World War scenario, yeah, possibly. I think so anyway. But once again, of course, you know, I'm not an expert in that, but, you know, reach out and check out that episode with Tim Kennedy, because I think he speaks to this specifically a little bit in his conversation with Mr. Mickler. So, all right, Nick Bruno. Hey guys, do either of you have methods of de-escalating public altercations and arguments with strangers, specifically ones that have worked for you in the past? While I'm keeping my self-defense skills dialed in, I'm also looking to work on communication skills to aid them. So the key thing here, and so my response, Nick, is not going to be towards general public altercations versus people that's worked with you. I think the strategy and the approach is roughly about the same in either one of those scenarios. So let's kind of, you know, run those by you really quick. So the first thing is, what is your goal? What are you trying to do? And in your example, we're de-escalating. And I think step number one is begin with the end in mind, right? Don't let go of the goal of what you're trying to achieve. I think when we're in a confrontational situation with individuals, we have a tendency to maybe let our ego come into play, and we might lose sight of what the ultimate goal is and what we're attempting to do. So that's number one, begin with the end in mind. What is the goal that you're trying to accomplish? Number two, seek to understand their perspective. Why are they so upset? And really enter the scenario from the perspective of you genuinely wanting to understand and to understand where their perspective and where they're coming from. The reason why is then you can actually speak logically with them, perhaps if they're being somewhat logical. But at least you can show some empathy or be able to relate to them and establish trust with them as part of that conversation. The second, don't accuse them either. And for that matter, this goes with any argument, right? With someone else, Stephen Covey would say, first seek to understand, then to be understood. So we need to be able to relate with them. Don't accuse them of something. Try to eliminate that idea of that they're wrong and someone's right. Just understand that they have a different perspective, and that they're probably justified in whatever feelings that they are having. So then that way you can relate to them. And then as part of that process, keep your emotions in check. You have to keep your emotions in check. If people are obviously upset, they may attack you. They may start throwing insults at you. You need to keep those emotions in check so you don't get all riled up and then forget about the entire goal and the objective in which you had, and then generate or just get involved in a negative way. So those are a few things that come to mind. Good resources on this. A good friend of mine, Edward Simmons, he actually bought me this book and sent it to me years ago. Check out Crucial Conversations. I think that's a great book from any scenario, whether it's relationships with family members or difficult conversations within the workforce. And I do think a lot of the principles in that book are applicable to even de-escalating with individuals that you don't even know. Now it's a little bit shortened, right? Because we have to focus on establishing trust right away. And then we can speak from a perspective of after we can speak from a place of understanding their perspective, and hopefully kind of talk them down from the situation that you're dealing with. So, all right, Lee Chappelle. My wife and I found out yesterday that she's having our first child. This news has restored a lot of faith in God because we were told that it was pretty much practically impossible for her to get pregnant. With that said, what are some things and organizations an expecting father can get involved with to make sure their kids grow up the proper way? I've always avoided the parenting podcast because it always was a touchy subject for me. Lee, this is totally not what you're asking, but when I read this question, I immediately was like, restored my faith in God, right? Because you got what you want. So if you don't mind, and Lee, first of all, I don't know you, right? But this is a touchy subject, right? And especially if this is something that's very meaningful to you, I could see where we might be tempted to lose our faith in God or a higher power because this is something that we feel we should have in our lives. But I just feel inclined to say this. Don't lose faith because we didn't get something. I try to see it this way, and I'm not speaking from a place of from a superior place, right? I try to do this often. And one of the things I try to remind myself about is I don't deserve anything. I don't deserve anything from God, and I don't deserve anything from anyone else. And so we kind of we walk around with this story and these interpretations of I should be able to have children. I should. And says who? So don't throw out faith. Don't throw out something that might give you guidance and direction in life because it doesn't fit your narrative of how life should show up for you. So, and obviously maybe that's not applicable to you, Lee, right? Because in this case, you are quote unquote getting what you want, but be mindful of that. And maybe I'm speaking to someone else that's listening is just, guys, that's not how life works. And we need to stop, we need to freaking let go of this idea of how it should be and let go of some of our expectations and be grateful and deal with what we do have. So back to your question, resources on, existing fathers. So first off, congrats, awesome, super cool. Best thing, at least for me, best thing that's ever happened to me in my life is having the opportunity to be a father. Also, one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do with my life. Who would have thought, right? And what's interesting about your question, which is great, and I'm not saying that you're saying this, but I think I'm going to use your question as an example here is, we want to be good at something. If you want to be good at a sport, what do? You train, right? We train to become better at golf, right? We train to be on the basketball team. You want a good job? What do? You go to university or you get some formalized training, right? We train to be good at something. how often, or I don't know, this is a question I'm posing to the guys on the call that are soon to be fathers. Do you train to be a good father? Or so for some of us that are fathers, do we train to be good fathers? And the answer is no. Like, for the most part, we just kind of wing that one. And in a grand scheme of things, that's more important than the job. That's more important than the sports we play. That's more important than anything else, is being a good father. So yeah, we should train, and we should be reading books, and we should be studying, and we should like work on communication skills and how do we handle our children. And one of the best ways that we can do that is obviously being a great role model for them. But there's also additional resources that we should focus on. One thing that comes to mind, if you're having a boy, and I've said this so many times, and I feel silly even saying it more, but it's so true. If you're having a boy, you got to read The Boy Crisis. You really do. That book is so profound. You need to find parenting books. And I unfortunately, I can't think of any off the cuff, right? Well, okay, a couple things. Jordan Peterson's books are great. His content is good, I think, around parenting. Another book I recently read that was pretty profound in the space of parenting is Outward Mindset by the Harbinger Institute. I would look that book up as well. And then I would really focus on like psychology books, whether it's around cognitive behavior. I would even focus on books. I'm spacing it right now, Unf Yourself, books like that. I think the more that you can understand the psychology of human nature and how we function, the better off you're going to be. And so hats off to you. One, that you're having a baby. That's super awesome. Two, that you're even seeing this as a critical issue. But I wouldn't look past the idea that one of the best things that you can do is by being the best man possible. And so I'd focus on being a man of integrity. I'd focus on leveling up in areas of your life. I'd focus on getting your nutrition and your fitness dialed in, because that affects your children, obviously. And I would also focus on making sure that you're showing up as a great husband, because that is the example that your children will eventually have on what it looks like to have a successful marriage. And they're going to, look at how you treat their mom, whether it's a girl, on the kind of man that they want to be with, or your boys in regards to how you treat a woman. So just make sure to dial in those areas and do the research on the parenting side. I wish I could remember some other books I've read on the parenting side, but at least those are the ones that come to mind. If those cross my mind later, I'll come back to your question. So, all right, Kappa Philip. As a man who has just turned 30, my fiance is also 30. How would you bring up the subject of wanting children in a more realistic way? I mean that we both want children. However, she is very career focused and got the idea we are not ready yet. We both have permanent jobs with good pay, our own house, and a very little debt. I've been ready for this for a while, but I get shot down whenever I bring it up. How would you advise discussing the subject without potentially driving a wedge between us? All right, so a couple things that kind of come in mind. First, be clear that she really wants a kid. I know she, quote unquote, said that in the past, and maybe she even says that now. But make sure this is the last thing that you want her doing out of spite or being coerced into. So make sure that she's on the same page with you. Second, I would get logical on your options and have that conversation. So when is the best time? And as you have that conversation, because she obviously has some type of perspective, right? That like, what makes it not a good time and what would make it a good time? Like, I would really have that conversation on clearly defining what that is, with the realization that there's never going to be a perfect time. And then third, also have the conversation that time is an issue. Time is going to be against you. In fact, if she's 30, time is already against you a little bit. And obviously the science says that the longer you wait, the higher probability is that there could be complications in the pregnancy. And she may not want to hear that, and she may not want to think about it, but that's the reality. That's truth. And so that's something certainly for her to consider. Fourth, I would get clear on her fears and the reason that she feels that right now is not a good time. Like, why? What is it that she's afraid of? And you're going to really need to get clear on those concerns so you can help mitigate them and really like understand her, right? Don't make her wrong for it, but like have the open dialogue, understand where her fears are coming from. And then maybe there's some conversation there for you to like, oh, well, I understand that that's your fear. What if I did this? Or what if I, got a better paying job, or, you know what I mean? Whatever that is, I would get really clear on what the concerns are. So you guys can have a logical conversation about it. The key thing is try not to make her wrong for not jumping on board. That's not going to go well for you, right? And to be frank, this is a perfect, crucial conversation. So maybe get your hands on that book. Seek first to understand where she's coming from. Keep asking the why, understand where it's coming from. Try not to make her wrong or like, well, that's not the case. No, like just understand that that's her perspective and her reality a little bit. And so, and then kind of go from there. Hopefully that helps. All right. Travis Arnett. Have you guys ever considered having a female on the show who supports and agrees with the movement to restore men to gain a woman's perspective on why it is important for men to embrace their roles to protect, provide, and preside, and perhaps gain insight on how women at large have been conditioned to dismiss masculinity as toxic? So first off, Travis, we have had a woman or women on the podcast in the past. And I don't think this is something that Ryan is like against. Certainly the primary criteria of the Order of Man movement is to help men become better men. Right. And as long as I think it's in line with that mission, I think Ryan's open to having that conversation with anybody, regardless of a vendor or positions or politics or anything else. I do think it's important to note, though, that it's the man-to-man conversations that are kind of lacking in society. And I do believe that men learn best from other men. That's how we step into manhood is from other men, and not from women. That may sound controversial, but that's the reality. And so obviously that's probably the majority of the reason why we have the guests we have, because those are who men are looking up to, I should say. And they have the greater impact, on men. Right. So, but certainly something that is not against, what we're doing here on the podcast. It's just kind of how it works out that way. So if you have some suggestions on female guests, feel free to shoot those over to Ryan, and I'm sure that he would entertain those guests. To connect with him on Instagram, that's Ryan Michler, Michler. John Regan was having a lot of mental health problems, and I let go of my role as a presider, and my wife had to step into that. Now that I'm coming back, feeling better and doing things I know I need to for me as a man, but my wife is still on that role and we have frequent conflicts now. How do I navigate that without damaging the relationship and get discouraged and slip back into a bad mental place? All right. So your wife stepped up because you stepped down, right? And she filled a role. So John, and I read this, how do I, without damaging the relationship or get discouraged and slip back? And so by default, when I read like discouraged and slip back, it's like, oh, okay, John's like on the edge here, right? And if I don't give you the right answer, or if I offend you in a slight way, it's like you're going to throw your hands up and slip back, right? In a bad mental place. So first off, I don't know what a bad mental space is, and I'm not a doctor, right? So, or a psychiatrist. So figure that out on your own. But however, one of the benefits is I'm not that. So I get to tell you exactly what I think. And you obviously answered the question because you want to hear what I think. So the first thing is, if you're on the edge of slipping back and being discouraged because you're having a difficult time with her, then you're not making the right decisions for the right reason. So let's get into what presiding is really about. And in my opinion, to preside doesn't require your spouse and like a title for everyone to like praise you and say, okay, you're in a presiding position, so like, here you go. No, you preside. Why? Because you're invested to the desired outcome. Because you're committed to making sure, or you're committed to serving to make sure something gets taken care of. And guess what that doesn't require? That doesn't require her to like promote you to that. It doesn't require her to do anything for that matter. It requires you to care. And from a position, like a true caring position, not from authority. And so I would challenge you, and hopefully I'm not coming across too harsh here, John. I would challenge you is focus on like, why do I want to preside, and have that exist above and beyond what anyone else thinks. And you do it because you're committed to that. Now, also give her some grace. You're mentioning here, right? I had mental problems. I stepped down. She stepped up. Well, you officially got yourself in a position where she may have lost some trust in you. And maybe she feels like she can't rely on you now. That's going to take time. And it sucks. Like, I totally get it. Like, that's unfair. Possibly. You might think that's unfair. That you have you have a dip, and all of a sudden now you have to fight harder. But man, welcome to life. I can make a mistake tomorrow and destroy relationships and then immediately turn back around and be a man of integrity. And guess what? It's going to take time. So give her some grace and understand that you're going to have to build back that confidence with her. And I think the best way that you can do that is being invested and committed to the outcome of presiding and caring, and making that the primary reason why you do what you do. And when she fights back, or you guys have some conflict in that area, just help communicate to her that you're coming from a position of caring, not from a position of control. The other things that kind of come to mind is keep to your agreements, set clear expectations, over communicate with her, and you're going to have to be a man of integrity at all times. At all times, you have to honor your word. And through that, she'll start being able to rely on you more because she knows she can, but it's going to take time. And are we perfect? No. And neither are you. And the minute you slip up, the minute you're out of integrity, you need to restore it. And when you restore it, by the way, and I struggle with this, when you restore your integrity, you need to communicate that, just like clearing it in your own head and like going, oh, okay, yeah, I know it, got it. No, you need to apologize. You need to fix the scenario. You need to communicate that to her. So focus on being a man of integrity. Give her some grace. You're going to have to restore that trust in her. Focus on what presiding really means. And it's really, from my perspective, it's you being invested to a desired outcome. Like, it's service. It's your commitment to service. And then keep your agreements, set clear expectations, and over communicate. All right, Gary Tate. Kipp, every time I catch these AMAs in time, I can never think of a good quality question. So I'm just going to ask. Apparently, this is not a good quality question. Who would win at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu between yourself and Ryan Mickler? So I read this question because it's funny. I should, right? I've been training like 10 years longer than Ryan. So you'd think that 10 years of more training would warrant maybe a quote unquote win on my part. But that's not always how it works, man. I get caught all the time, and I'm getting caught by white belts and blue belts and purple belts. And then I just get my ass kicked by black belts. So, and other brown belts for that matter. So yeah, sure. I should beat Ryan, but in the same breath, and I know, Gary, you're just kind of being fun, and it is fun, but I was thought, there's a good thing here in this question. And the thing is that we do this kind of, right? We do this compared, who would win between these two? And we might even compare ourselves to other individuals and think that like we should win, when in reality, it's like, no, actually, not that you shouldn't try to, but is there meaning behind Ryan or around me beating Ryan in a jiu-jitsu match? I mean, let's hope that I would actually be able to tap in 10 years, but I've also rolled with Ryan. He's a tough SOB. So I want to put it past him, and I'm not 100% sure he hasn't caught me. So I think he has in the past. So it's up for grabs, Gary. All right. Brian Phillips. How do you choose the right business to open if you understand that most of the things you are passionate about are not lucrative or in the fields where you want to be able to compete with big businesses? As an example, I would like to open a fitness facility, but in my area in Charlotte is absolutely saturated with gyms and big chain fitness companies like Gold's Gym, Planet Fitness, and etc. My wife is in a similar situation where she would like to open some sort of children and mothers maternity clothing store, but it's hard to compete with big chain stores and online businesses. All right, so I got a couple examples, Brian. So first off, when I started my business, roughly it's been probably about 15 years ago, I think, I competed at a global level. I competed with consulting firms in New York. I competed with consulting firms in Utah. I competed with consulting firms in Washington, D.C., with the Department of Defense. I competed with all kinds of companies. Why would they choose? And in the early days, it was just me. Why would a company choose just me? Because I was more valuable. So I'd be careful just to assume that you can't compete at a larger scale. Now, are you going to compete with the same cash flow? Possibly not, but you're a lean machine, right? It's you, it's your wife, it's maybe a handful of employees. There's things in that market that you can go after that they can't. Maybe you can have lower rates or whatever, right? So a couple things that come to mind is, one, what did UPS do when they started? Think about that. UPS competed with the United States Postal Service, a company that was government controlled and managed, that had a built-in, like literally a built-in client base. And don't get me pissed off about this, but like they even sell my data to people and make money without my approval, right? Like that is the United States Postal Service. They can't fail. Like they're failing and they can't fail. But FedEx and UPS can do the same exact service. You don't think those guys at one point thought, oh man, there's no way we can get into this market? Well, they did. And they did an awesome job, by the way. If I remember the story correctly, that was like a college project and the kid got like an F on that suggested business plan. Obviously worked out. So I want to downplay your ability to pull something off. If anything, I would look at that and say, saturated in those markets, awesome. Now you know there's a need. Address that, check that off. You know that there's a need for those things. So a couple things of advice or a couple things to consider here. Define what your unique selling proposition is. What makes you different than all the other companies? Get very clear on that and make sure that you communicate it in a way in your marketing material to your client base. You need to identify why you're different. That's your unique selling proposition. Number two, focus on a minimal viable product, an MVP. That's a really great way to test out the market and validate that your unique selling proposition is going to work. Don't fall into this pit of, oh, well, I gotta have this massive building and take this loan or whatever, and then I'll go get customers. No, there's ways to pull this off. There's ways, if you're creative enough, for you to get in the fitness area without, quote unquote, like becoming a Gold's Gym and making, massive investments, all to try to see if it works or not. So focus unique selling proposition, and then establish an MVP and a minimal viable product and test out the market. The last thing I would suggest, just because it's on my mind, Story Brand. Read that book. Focus on making your client the hero and you support them, and figure out how do you wow your clients. One of the things that we do where I work is we talk about this, how did we wow the client? We don't want to do just a good job. I want the client to be wowed, to go, whoa, that was an amazing experience. Figure out what that is. And maybe that's your unique selling proposition, right? Is wherever that wow is. But I want to downplay your situation. I think it could easily work. So Cordell Neely, can you elaborate more about when Wild at Heart talks about finding an adventure to live, specifically about men finding themselves wanting to go west and be everything they were made to be? I've had this gut feeling or calling to go south and to live in Texas or Tennessee or some other state in the South. My reservation is that practically all my family lives here in Kansas, and I've lived here my whole life, here thus far. All right. So, and Cordell, maybe this is like the adventure to live is part of, moving. I think that's would be different for other individuals. I think for me, what this really means is, I'm trying to remember this phrase that I used to use and I've heard: live a life worth living. Like, think about it. What does it mean to live a life worth living? And for some of us, that is taking risk. That is doing exciting things. For others, it's finding a life of purpose and meaning, something more than just a 9-to-5, right? Something that lights us up. Now, that could be our day job. That thing that lights us up could be our side hustle. It could be an organization that we're part of. Like, it's really around that vision, purpose, fulfillment, and then taking the necessary risks to see them through. I think most of us don't go after those things because we don't want to take the risk. And sometimes the risk is perceived. It's not even like real risk. And so I think we need to be unreasonable with ourselves sometimes and kind of just put it out there and go for it, whatever that is. And so maybe moving to Texas is that for you, or Tennessee? But regardless, I think you got to define that for yourself, because I even think you could move south and still feel that you're not living that way. So define, what is a life worth living? KJ Drown. How can I get my wife to see the changes I'm making to be healthier in life is not to leave her one day, and that trying to get my son in martial arts is not teaching him to be violent? Oh man. So first off, maybe I shouldn't. Well, I'm trying to think if this is true before I say it, but my natural instinct is, I do take martial arts to learn how to be violent. So maybe we just address that right off the bat. It's a form of violence, a form of aggression, within the confines of a martial arts school, where we learn discipline, the ability to control our emotions, maybe to be violent, but to also do it logically and be able to feel that aggression and deal with our ego and our fears all at the same time while being violent with someone. So there you go. There, KJ, there's the answer to your wife. I am sending her martial arts to be violent. So now that we have that addressed, I would ask, do you know why she's afraid of those things? Why is she afraid of you leaving her one day? And where's the fear coming from about your son being violent? I think it's an important conversation to be had and an answer that you should probably get present with so you can get her committed to what you're doing. Now, I say this all, but how do I get my wife to see the changes? Well, first off, you can't control your wife. So let's get that clear. Now, can you own how you show up in relationships? Sure. But you're not going to change, you can't force someone to see you a certain way, but I do think there's power in taking responsibility in regards to how you show up. And so I would start evaluating how you're showing up. How are you showing up outside of, going to the gym? How are you showing up in a relationship that she thinks that's a risk to your relationship? Maybe there's areas in which you're showing up in your relationship with her that she has a reason to question whether you're going to leave her someday. And now the gym is just a manifestation of that. So I don't think it's about convincing her about, hey, going to the gym is not me leaving you. I think it's what actions am I making on a regular basis that would even cause her to consider that. Now, same thing possibly with her son. What is she concerned about? What is the real fear? Yeah, does her past show that, she's had violent men in her life, and so she doesn't want her son to show up that way? And whether logical or not, or whether right or wrong, she'd probably be coming to the table with that perception for a reason. I think it's valuable for you to understand her and understand why she might think that way. And then you can address those concerns from a place of understanding, from a baseline of understanding her feelings about, you leaving, or, the stability of your relationship, or your son being violent. So I would really focus on asking the why, deep dive into the why. And then you can kind of deal with it from there. And own how you show up. I think that's the other thing, the other key thing there. All right, Shane Matthews, we're kind of going through these quick. We might get through all your questions. All right, Shane Matthews, this is relating discipline. How do you become more disciplined in every way? I feel like I get derailed a lot in every way. Every way. All right, Shane. So this is where I'm going to go with this. Disciplined. When I hear this, I think when you don't have discipline, you're not doing what you should do. You're out of integrity. You're making excuses and you're lying to yourself. You probably aren't honoring your word to yourself, and you've accepted mediocrity as a version of yourself. You've accepted the perception that you're this guy, that you're the individual that sleeps in when he knows he should get up, that you don't do the workouts, or you might skip reps, little things. You wouldn't do those things unless you bought into the idea of that's the kind of man you are. And by the way, and Shane, you already know this is important, but hopefully this kind of solidifies the thought process here. When we make excuses, because that's what has to happen, right? You have to make an excuse for you to live with yourself. You're I'm not going to finish. Why? Well, I got up late and I'm really tired, or I'm going to skip leg day. Why? Well, because I had that run, or I stepped late. I'll do it later. We make excuses. Or my favorite that I do all the time is, I think today's an exception to the rule. Not today. Today's a bad day. So it's going to be okay today. And then tomorrow, the someday of the week, the 8th day of the week called someday, then I'll do it. when things are more aligned, then I will. And those excuses I have to come up with for me to be okay with it. And what's interesting is sometimes, and not all the time, but probably most of the time, when we make excuses, we sometimes even attach them to blaming someone else. This is something I learned from the Outward Mindset book, that when we make excuses and we're out of integrity, those excuses are, well, I didn't do this because, and then we have a tendency to point someone else. Well, they should have. Or if she was this way, then I would. And then we have to perpetuate that story and that blaming with someone else for us to live with ourselves. And we drag that story along. And then when we get an opportunity, we'll enlist someone in our story. Oh, let me tell you about my wife. Oh my goodness. And then I'll bitch and moan to someone else. They'll nod their head. Oh man, I feel sorry for you. And then I feel even more justified in my excuse. Oh yeah, I knew I was right. He totally agreed with me. And we enlist and we speak ill and evil of other individuals, all so we can live with ourselves and the fact that we're out of integrity. It's not, and don't get me wrong, it is discipline. But what's at risk? Hopefully you're seeing what's at risk. It's how you show up. It's how you're perceived. It's your relationships. It's how you see yourself. That's at risk of you not being disciplined. That's the cost of not having discipline. You're out of integrity. And what's interesting too, I think, is when we have full integrity, we deal with things better. We show up in a different way. And hopefully someone else can relate to this, and this isn't just a Kipp thing. When I'm on the path and I have full integrity and I go home and I have an argument with my wife, I deal with that 100% better because I'm in line with myself. So when you don't have discipline, you're not showing up that way. When you don't have discipline, you're yanking away some of your freedom. And then you're showing up in a way that's impactful to those in your life, a negative way. Our impact in our families, in our societies, in our workplace is massive. And I don't think that we understand how great that impact is. And when you're mediocre, your impact sucks. And your light is not even shining in a way to uplift other individuals. You're a shadow. You don't make a difference. So Ryan and I talk about this sometimes. It's like the carrot or the stick. That's the stick. I'm giving you the stick. The stick motivates me. Now, the carrot would probably be, hey, Shane, get discipline, man. Once you have discipline, you have more freedoms, right? And we can talk about extreme ownership and some of Jocko's philosophy around discipline equals freedom. The stick part is you're going to live a life of regret. So get off the bleachers and get your ass on the court of life and start living in integrity. Have full integrity, have a life of discipline, because what's at stake is how your kids get raised. What's at stake is how your wife has support from you. What's at stake is how you could have uplifted all the people in your work, in your community, and your neighbors. That's what's at stake. So what's it going to be? You're going to die and be forgotten? Sorry, from Elsinore, Utah. You're going to die and get forgotten? Or are you going to live in a way where you have lasting impact? Couple resources that come to mind. Of course, extreme ownership, Atomic Habits, As a Man Thinketh. Man, I had focus on the cost. Hopefully that helps. Jake Thompson. I have a busy schedule and can only train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu once a week. How would you recommend making the most of my time so I can progress faster? What skills and moves would you recommend working on For context, I'm a white belt and I've been training since New Year's of 2021. So still pretty new. So Jake, first off, dude, don't quit. I think like statistically, the chances of you quitting jiu-jitsu is like really, really high. Don't quit. Second, let's get to your question. So don't quit. Second, I would show up with intent. And we talk about this sometimes in the Iron Council, which is the exclusive brotherhood of the Order of Man. To actually learn about the Iron Council, you can go to orderofman.com/Iron Council. Like how I did that. And we talk about affirmations. And one of the things I like about affirmations is it's a thought, it's a meditation around how you're going to show up in life. And I would think through it, like, for a guy that's getting the most out of his training session, how would you show up? How do you walk in the room? How do you get dressed? How do you walk on the mat? How do you do moves? Like, focused, laser focused, show up with intent. Second, I would focus on trying to get some drill time in. If you can only go once a week, show up a little early, find a partner to go drills, do some drills, and crazy amount of drills. Like, I'm going to drill this move 100 times, even though like the 10th time you're like, I got this, I don't need to drill it anymore. You drill it anyway. So much of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is about muscle memory. And it starts it's like built into your body. Some of the best training segments I've ever had while training over the last 12 years is when my mind was off and my body just did it. That's through repetition. So figure out, get those drills in, find a partner, drill often. Now you ask, what skills and moves would you recommend working on? So I would focus on a couple main positions and what your options are from that position. Now, you can focus on a guard, right? Figure out what guard you want to focus on, whether it's a closed guard, 93, spider guard, whatever, like make it your game. And I've gone through seasons, and I don't even know if this is a recommendation, if anyone else would recommend this, but I'm speaking from my experience, at least, that when I laser focus in on something, I get really good at it, like really, really good at it. And then it's almost like a time in a season, and then I move on, and then I like focus on something else. So like for the longest time, a double understack pass was like my bread and butter. Like I loved it. I would force it. I would even force it when I don't have it. And what would happen is I would learn like, okay, I got to set this up in a way because they know I'm going for it. Or they would counter in different ways, and then I would figure out another way to get it, right? And so, but I was just laser focused on a double understack. And I got so good at it. Now it's just like in my back pocket. I hardly ever use a double understack. Why? Because I don't need to. And I just keep it there. And then if I have a really hard roll and I can't like pass, then I pull it out. Then I go for it. Right. But it's something I just feel really, really confident around. And you get that way by just laser focused in that given position. So find a guard and then work through your scenarios. Like, okay, I got a 93 guard. What's my options from here? Okay, I loop choke. I got a Kimura, right? I can go for a knee bar. I can back take, underhook, right? Work through all the different scenarios and just play off of them and keep focus on them. The other thing I'd focus on is like, what's your passing game, right? What pass do you have to pass the guard? And focus on that. One of the stories, that I like to share sometimes. I was training in New York underneath Vitor Shaolin. I love Shaolin. I love training. One of the best coaches I've ever had. And I was training with Shaolin, and Shaolin has a very detailed approach for breaking the guard and passing. And he would teach it, and I never did it. And I wouldn't do it because I'd get swept. I'd go break the guard and I'd get swept. And so I stopped breaking the guard that way and passing that way. And then he eventually is like, why aren't you passing the guard that way? And I was like, well, because I keep getting swept. And he's like, and you'll continue to get swept until you do it and learn how not to get swept. That's the only way you're going to learn not to get swept, is by going for it. So figure out what those moves are. And sometimes you kind of got to force it, right? It's not a match. So sometimes we have a tendency to show up at a gym, especially white belts. Sorry, Jake, and all of the other white belts listening. We have a tendency to show up at a gym and it's like, this is a match, right? This is a fight. I got to win. Well, this is also a training time for you to figure out how that move works. And sometimes that means that you're going to be overly committed to a move and you're going to get swept, or you're going to get submitted, or it's not going to work. But you're not going to learn how to make it work if you abandon it all the time and like play it safe. So figure out those moves, laser focus in, find a drilling partner, show up with intent. Hopefully that works. All right. And all you guys that aren't training, it's time to start training because you should. It's good for you. Brennan Lamprich. Sorry, Brendan. I'm 20 and just got engaged and graduated EMT class. By the way, I just graduated from EMT class as well. This summer, I will be getting my first full-time job and will be continuing on to paramedic this fall. At times, I find myself a little overwhelmed with all the upcoming changes and additional responsibilities that will be added to my life in the next year. How do I combat feelings of being overwhelmed, and how do I tackle these added responsibilities with composure? So first off, mad props for getting on top of it, man, and getting on the path and like taking on responsibility, finding that job, finding some purpose in what you're doing, like all great things. Have fun doing it. Like, honestly, have fun doing it. And a lot of that comes back to perspective. I'm going to use my son as an example. And my apologies for you guys watching on YouTube because I'm going to look up a quote while I say this, because I think this quote is so good. Hold on. I probably shouldn't be doing this while I'm trying to talk here. Hold on. All right. Maybe I'm not, because you're going to have lots of dead space. This is the problem with going solo. All right. Change your perspective. Okay. I was going to use my son as an example. My oldest son has Usher syndrome and has, I believe at this point, like 5% degree of vision. And he's 21. If he woke up tomorrow and Hall had all his vision back, regardless of responsibilities in life, he could have the most stressful life. And if he woke up in the morning and had his vision back, do you think that would be the best day of his life? Totally would be. Why? Perspective. I wake up every morning and I can see fine. But am I ecstatic? Am I so happy to have my limbs? I mean, my son almost thought he cut off his arm with a chainsaw 2 weeks ago. Do you think he's grateful that he has his hand? Perspective, guys. So, Brendan, it's awesome. Get after it, man. Like, what you're doing is super cool. I don't want to downplay it, but enjoy the ride and be grateful. And one of the ways that we can be grateful, whether it's with a gratitude journal, one thing I used to do back in the day, I haven't done it for a while, probably I should, is I would just write every day. I'd write 3 things that I'm grateful for. And I'd have to explain them. And if I didn't feel grateful for something, I wasn't done. I had to come up with something. So life is great. And it's about the ride. And I did find that quote. This is by Gordon B. Hinckley. Anyone who imagines that bliss is normal is going to waste a lot of time running around shouting that he's been robbed. Most putts don't drop. Most beef is tough. Most children grow up to be just people. Most successful marriages require a high degree of mutual toleration. Most jobs are more often dull than otherwise. Life is like an old-time rail journey. Delays, sidetracks, smoke, dust, cinders, and jolts. Interspersed with only occasionally by beautiful vistas and thrilling bursts of speed. The trick is to thank the Lord for letting you have the ride. So enjoy the ride, man. Life is good, even though sometimes it doesn't seem that way. Yehuda Samuel, tips for newly married couples. So I'll just share like what advice I wish I had. And a lot of it had to come from the fact that I didn't see my parents argue. And so I didn't know what a good argument looked like. I didn't know what a fight looked like. Like it was oblivious to me. And I was so set on this idea that I even believed in the one. And I thought difficulty meant something was wrong. And I remember, I wasn't married long before our first fight. And I remember thinking, I married the wrong person. Like I made a mistake. You know how horrible that is, by the way, to think that I shouldn't have married this person. Seriously, I regret it. I shouldn't have. Like that's just toxic thought process, right? But that was all from the perspective that it shouldn't be this way, to this expectation of like how marriage should be and how she should be. And when she's not that way, then it's like something's wrong here. So I would recommend for newly married couples, let go of the idea that it's going to be easy. And when it's not, something's wrong. It's going to be hard. Now, I'm not saying like go home and make the shit hard or harder than it should be. Trust me, it's going to be hard enough on its own. But don't give up because it's hard. Give me an example in life where growth was made available because it was easy. It's going to be hard. So buckle up and deal with it and stay committed to what you're doing. So it's going to be hard. Now, a couple other things that come to mind. Accept her for who she is. Period. Without constraints. Why do you love her? Do you love her because of this? Do you love her because of that? Do you love her because of this? Like we can all have even reasons, right? Oh, I have all these reasons of why I love her. What happens when one of those quote unquote things go away? What, you're not going to love her anymore? I like this, and it may be a little off the beaten path here. I like this idea that I choose to love someone because I choose to. The way they are, their shortcomings, as well as their strengths. It's a choice. So make the conscious choice. That's up to you to choose. Try not to make them wrong. And I had one other thought that came to mind. And probably just communication. Just focus on communication. And this is, if my wife was listening, she'd be like, oh my dear Lord, he's recommending someone around communication. I am horrible at it. I really struggle with creating all types of meaning. I don't want to get I don't want to get fired up and upset at her. So I bottle things up. I don't thoroughly communicate. I mean, I'm horrible. So you know what? Let's just skip this question. I shouldn't be answering it, but I do think if I got the guidance and direction that, hey, you know what, Kipp, this is going to be hard and that's okay. And don't make it wrong. That was probably the most profound thing that would have really helped me in the early days when I first got married. So hopefully that accounts for something. All right. Last question. I'm only reading this because Marcus thinks he's funny. He says, Kipp, how is it that with your skill set, abilities, great hair, and looks that Ryan Michler has been able to keep you out of the limelight? You're amazing. Thank you, Marcus. I really appreciate that. And if I'm so amazing, why do you always try to hurt me when we're training? So whatever. I don't trust you. But I am possibly better looking than Mr. Michler. I don't know about the hair, though. You might have better hair than me. All right. Let's wrap up. I think we got roughly a solid hour in. So a couple things, guys, call to action or our ask. We talked about impact today. We talked about making a difference, leveling up. If you're listening to this, you're obviously bought into the message that we're trying to create and really how we're trying to serve other men. And if you are, share the message. Share the message, whether it's this podcast, another episode that resonates with you, whether it's the YouTube channel, or inviting them to the Facebook group. The point is, when we band together and surround ourselves with like-minded men, we level up. And so you can do that by joining us, by helping us in this movement called the Order of Man. And you can also join us within the Iron Council if that's something that you're interested in. And you can learn more about the Iron Council by going to orderofman.com/Iron Council. And a couple things. We have the Battle Ready program, so check that out, or orderofman.com/Battle Ready. A couple events coming up. The first is Legacy. This is a father and son event, September 23rd to the 26th in Maine. You can learn more about Legacy by going to orderofman.com/legacy. And then we have the Order of Man main event, October 7th through the 10th in Maine. You can learn more about that by going to orderofman/main event. And if you don't know how to spell Maine, you probably shouldn't be coming. To follow Mr. Michler on Instagram or Twitter, that's at Ryan Michler, RyanMachler. And if you want to connect with me, you can do so on Instagram at Kipp Sorensen. That's KIPPSORENSEN. And of course, visit the store for all your merch. That's store.orderofman.com. Wallets, shirts, hats, flags, decals. Support the movement. And until our Friday field notes, take action and become the man you were meant to be.